And at this point, let us now listen to the current status of research in CSR today through a situationer to be delivered by the Vice Chair of the CSR Committee of the Management Association of the Philippines. Please help me welcome Dr. Benito L. Teehankee.
A blessed good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank my friend Tony for inviting me and to reminding me of the time when I had hair. So, well, my goal this morning is to hopefully to provoke us to thinking about the CSR that our country really needs. And I've been an observer of CSR for as long as I can remember. And I think in many ways there has been progress, but in many ways CSR research has been a very big disappointment. But I think if we look at it very carefully, there is much we can do. So what I'd like to touch on, if I can get this to work, I think you may have to do it manually. Okay. So I'd like to touch on the general idea of CSR, which Tony has briefly touched on. And then what we usually focus on when we speak of CSR. But I'd like to situate CSR in the Philippine context because I think the needs of the Philippines are quite unique and we really have to situate what we do in CSR research given the situation of our country today. And then I'd like us to look at some realities in relation to corporate business in the Philippines and hopefully inspire us to pursue a vigorous agenda that will make CSR more relevant to our country. And then I'd like to propose that integral human development be a core idea that can be the focus of our CSR. Next. All right. So a lot of the CSR work started in 1979 with this man. His name is Archie Carroll. He's very advanced in years now, but he's still recognized as one of the gurus of CSR. And in one of the later books of Wayne Visser, this is how Carroll defined the general idea of CSR. He refers to it as the general belief held by citizens that modern businesses have responsibilities to society that extend beyond their obligations to the stockholders or investors in the firm. Even in my classes today, this is 2017, when I asked my classes, whether in the undergrad or the MBA, what is the main purpose of business, they all shout profit very quickly, almost without thinking. Which means that after all these decades of CSR, profit is still preeminent as the main obligation of business for most people. What CSR has argued is this is not the case, because business is a creation of society. Therefore, it has duties beyond profit. But this is something that is still a work in progress. Of course, businesses are expected to generate profit to give a return on invested capital. Otherwise, just put it in the bank, right? Although nowadays, bank interest rates are so low, who would put it in the bank? In some countries, in fact, interest rates are negative. You know, in Japan, if you put money in the bank, you lose money. So they would rather you spend it. And of course, thanks to our central bank, savings account deposit rates now is less than 1%, right? I think it's 0.5%. So the message is spend your money or invest it in a business because it should give a higher return if you handle it well. So the key idea is that societal stakeholders include customers, of course, employees, the community at large, government, and the natural environment. Let's see if I can get this to work. Next. Okay, so this was the original pyramid of Carroll, where he explains the economic responsibilities of business here. Be profitable, that's the first social responsibility. Then legal responsibilities, meaning obey the laws. And then ethical responsibilities, meaning do no harm. And of course, philanthropic responsibilities. Unfortunately, a lot of CSR research believes that the top of the pyramid is the main thing about CSR, that it is mainly philanthropy. A lot of the other layers are often forgotten. Next. Now, if we look at, can we show the whole slide? If we look at a lot of CSR research, most of it really still focuses on philanthropy and outreach. In fact, in the Philippines, when you say nagsi-CSR yung company, they basically mean they're doing philanthropy. So it has become almost like toothpaste is Colgate, right? Meron ka bang Colgate toothpaste, no? So it's unfortunate because although we all believe in philanthropy, CSR was meant to be a bigger idea than philanthropy. The second popular types of research we see, and this is true even at De La Salle, is the business case. Meaning, if you do CSR, do you make more money? So which means that, because a lot of businesses say, well, if I do social responsibility, malulugi ako eh. So the research says, well, we'll prove to you that if you are socially responsible, you'll make money. Of course, the challenge here is after thousands of such studies have been done all over the world, the picture is very mixed. Some make money, some do not. For some, it doesn't make a difference, which is actually not a surprise because no matter how socially responsible you are, if your product or service is lousy, why would you expect to make money, right? So the key question here is that, does the market reward social responsibility? But what research has shown is that being socially responsible is costly. To set up a proper waste treatment plant in your factory is expensive. To set up a proper health program for your employees is expensive. So it can reduce profit in the short term. But the key is to find out if that can be used as a leverage to be more effective as a business. The third type of research that I've seen is management attitudes and definitions of CSR. We have seen a lot of surveys. Researchers survey businesses, what they think of CSR, what they think should be prioritized in CSR. Even in MAP, in the Shareholders Association of the Philippines, in the League of Corporate Foundations, they do these kinds of studies. The fourth is whether CSR activities make customers buy more from companies. So this is another common type of research. Especially for millennials, there is a hypothesis that millennials will patronize businesses who are seen as socially responsible. I don't know, maybe we should ask you here, would you buy more from socially responsible businesses? Well, the big question is, if you will buy from them, what if their product is 10% more expensive or 15% more expensive? Would you still buy? So this is an important question. And of course, the flavor of the month, social enterprise. We are seeing a deluge of social enterprise research, which is fascinating. These are businesses that are set up to address specific issues. For example, there are social businesses who help youth at risk, right? Either those from the street or recovering from human trafficking. They put them into educational programs and make them productive. There are social enterprises that focus on taking care of persons with disabilities, but they're doing it while running a profitable business. So those are social enterprises. Now, I like social enterprises, but the problem is a lot of businesses, when they're asked to be socially responsible, they say, well, I think we can leave that to the social enterprise. So what has happened is they have delegated social responsibility to social enterprises, forgetting the point that they themselves have to be socially responsible. So although this research are all fruitful and productive, they have their own limitations in terms of impact. So let's look at some realities. Now, let's situate Philippine business in our legal system. So let's look at this slide. This is the 1987 Constitution, of course. We might as well study this now because I think they plan to change it. So while it's still here, let's study it. I love this document. I don't know why the people in Congress keep wanting to change it. Anyway, Section 6 says, the use of property bears a social function, and all economic agents shall contribute to the common good. I'm always proud to say that the Philippine Constitution is the only one in the world that says the common good 7 times. It is the main principle of our Constitution. Corporations shall have the right to own, establish, and operate economic enterprises, but subject to the duty of the state to promote distributive justice and to intervene when the common good so demands. So in other words, corporations are legal entities, but they're supposed to be agents for the common good. In fact, this is enshrined in the next slide, which is the vision of the Corporation Code. The Corporation Code is the most important law for corporations. Any 5 to 15 people can come together and file at the Securities and Exchange Commission to form a corporation. And the code seeks to establish a new concept of business, not merely entities established for private gain, but effective partners of the government in spreading the benefits of capitalism. So you can see that the Constitution and the Corporation Code are consistent. Corporations are supposed to be spreading agents. They're supposed to make prosperity and development available for all. Next. The SEC followed this up. Effective January 2017, the Securities and Exchange Commission released the Code of Corporate Governance. And it says, well, let me just focus on the one at the bottom. The purpose of the corporation, or the code rather, is to maximize the organization's long-term success, creating sustainable value for its shareholders, stakeholders, and the nation. Notice that shareholders are always mentioned, but they are also mentioned in the same breath as stakeholders, which are other groups, as well as the society at large. Next. And to concretize that, the SEC Code of Corporate Governance says, under Principle 16, that the company should be socially responsible in all its dealings with the communities where it operates. So what has happened is that CSR and corporate governance has now intersected. Corporate governance refers to how the board of directors of companies run the corporation. Now it is understood that the boards are responsible to the community at large. This is the first time the government has stated this as explicitly as this. And I think for those who want to do research on CSR and governance, this is a terrific opening because since this is new, companies are expected to report on how they are complying with this within the next year. For example, it should ensure that its interactions serve its environment and stakeholders in a positive and progressive manner that is fully supportive of its comprehensive and balanced development. So remember those two terms. No? Corporations are supposed to interact with different stakeholders in a positive and progressive manner. Later on, I'll ask you whether you think that that is happening. Next. Okay, so I tried to make a diagram to situate our corporation. So if we look at the corporation as being within the green box, so the corporation is expected to deliver services to customers over here, products and services. And then if they deliver good products and services that help humans to develop, customers reciprocate by purchasing and continued patronage. Now what makes a corporation very complicated is that you have a board who oversee management, and management supervises employees. Now, one of the main stakeholders of corporations are, of course, the employees themselves. And companies are expected to provide a working environment where employees can meet their needs as human beings, for them to grow. Now, of course, the products and services are supposed to be socially beneficial. So we already have two stakeholders here, the employees and the customers. And then, of course, the suppliers who provide the inputs to the company are supposed to be compensated fairly and given development support. And the creditors who give funds to the company are expected to be repaid with adequate return. And of course, the investors who provide capital are expecting to get a fair and attractive return on the investment. And of course, now we realize that the environment is also a stakeholder, not only for the present generation, but even for the future generation. I always like to tell my students that when I was growing up along Rojas Boulevard, I would go and fish along the Manila Bay. We didn't have any of the reclaimed area yet, but the water was so clean you could literally fish there and eat clean fish. You can still fish there now, but I think you will not dare eat the fish. But my dream is that our grandchildren and your children can fish in the Manila Bay in the future, and even the Pasig River. So the key is that the corporation must satisfy its relationship with all of these stakeholders so that community will trust it. Society will trust it. The referee for all of this is, of course, the government. As I mentioned, the Securities and Exchange Commission is the main body supervising the corporations. So corporations pay taxes to government. Government gives it legal license, provides law enforcement and infrastructure support. So this is the very, very challenging balancing act that the corporation has to do. Next. Okay, if we look at Philippine society now, it's shaped a lot like this. I'm reminded of the Titanic movie. Did you see Titanic? It's an old movie. Anyway, you will remember that Rose is from the top of the boat and Jack is from the bottom of the boat, right? But you know, they saw each other and something happened, right? So Rose would always go down in the bottom of the boat. They would dance and they would laugh. But in our society, this is the situation. We have a few who have opportunities for development and very many who do not. So that's why I symbolize them as being underwater. Our goal, and this is the vision of the Constitution, is, next, we need to grow our middle class. In fact, in our region, our middle class is not growing fast enough. The middle class of Vietnam is growing faster than the middle class of the Philippines. And Vietnam is a communist country. That gives you an idea. But our goal is to be like this. Next slide. All countries in the industrial world, of course, the models are always the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands. They all started like this. But through the years, they became like this. In fact, our own neighbors, Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, they all started like this in the 50s. As you know, Singapore is like this now. So countries can do this. South Korea started like this. It is like this now. However, we have one of the most persistent poverty situations in this part of the world. Our poverty is about 22%. Next slide, please. So the Constitution says our goal is to achieve a rising standard of living and an improved quality of life for all. Next. Okay, let's look at some realities. Philippine business has been helping our economy grow since 1994. So this is the data we have from 1994 to 2015. The blue line symbolizes the revenue from the top 1,000 corporations. I think everybody will agree that the growth of our economy has been almost spectacular. We are one of the fastest growing economies in the region, second only to China in the last few years. And if you see the growing yellow portion here, these are the small and medium enterprises, which is an encouraging thing, right? But clearly, the big businesses dominate our economy. Next. In fact, the dominance is very clear. For 2015, our economy was about 13.3 trillion. The top 100 corporations controlled 35% of the economy. The top 200 corporations controlled 44% of the economy. And this is the most interesting. The top 50 conglomerates control almost half of the economy. Now, you know all the conglomerates, right? The Lopez Group, the SM Group, the Gokongwei Group, the Lushutan Group, and of course now we have the group of Ramon Ang, of Manny Pangilinan. These are the conglomerates. They have a very huge share of the economy of the country. Next. Next. All right. I wonder if anybody invests in the stock market here. Anyone? Other than Tony, of course. Well, if you have your money in the stock market, you're not doing so badly. I remember when I first invested in the stock market, when I bought my first share of Petron in the mid-90s, the whole market was just 1 trillion pesos, the whole capital market of the Philippines. Now the market is about 14.4 trillion. Di na nga magkasya dun sa graph ko eh. Okay. But of course, the question is, how many Filipinos invest in the stock market? Less than 1%. In Malaysia, 35% of citizens invest in the stock market. In Singapore, 50% of citizens invest in the stock market. In the Philippines, less than 1% invest. So the question is, if there is so much growth, how come less than 1% invest? This is a role that the educational institution should address. How to share this knowledge so that more citizens, instead of buying new gadgets all the time, do you like going to Jollibee? Who eats at Jollibee here? Raise your hands. I eat at Jollibee. Now, why not, since you eat at Jollibee all the time, buy a share of Jollibee? So that every time you're eating your Yum Burger or your Chicken Joy, you're also making money for yourself, right? Because we are a consumption-driven economy. We like to consume. We like to go to the malls. The problem is that is not sustainable. Consumption is not sustainable. We must finance businesses. Next. Now, despite all of this growth, we have the highest unemployment rate in ASEAN. In 2015, the ASEAN integration started, and the statistics are clear here for all our neighbors in the region, Cambodia, Thailand, all the way to Indonesia. The Philippines has the highest unemployment rate. So we have very fast economic growth, very fast growth in the stock market, but very persistently high unemployment. I think this already gives you an idea where our CSR research should go. Next. So of course, when we go around the country, we have pockets of development, right? Before it was just the Makati Business District, but then we had the Ortigas Business District, Eastwood, which used to be just Libis, right? Talahiban lang yun eh. And now we have the Bonifacio Global City. If you go to Iloilo, there's development there. But that's always beside the same situation of poverty that we've seen for years. Now, if you're impressed with the Bonifacio Global City, I think we can all agree that we need more than 100 Bonifacio Global Cities in this country. And we better get to work to do it. We should have one in Basilan, one in Marawi. Next slide. Well, speaking of, the government reports that our poverty rate is about 22%. But you know that poverty rate doesn't mean anything. Because as NEDA itself reports, if you look at our map, there are parts of our country where poverty is greater than 60%. And of course, as you know, martial law has been declared in the south, and the area where there is now open rebellion to the government, where Marawi is, and of course where Maguindanao is as well, has poverty higher than 60%. So it's not surprising that warlordism is rampant and blatant abuses of human rights are common here. So this diagram should remind all of us that we have so much work to do to fulfill the vision of the Constitution, which is an increasing quality of life for all. Now, you put this side by side to the diagrams I showed earlier of this very high business growth, very high economic growth, very high growth of the stock market, and you can see that our challenge is very real. Our commitment to the United Nations Millennium Development Goals was to bring our poverty to 17% by 2015. Obviously, we missed our target, so we're still hoping. Thailand brought its poverty below 10% as early as 2002. That's Thailand. It is now 2017, our poverty rate refuses to go below 20%, despite our record economic growth. Next. So one of the reasons is businesses favor customers and investors. In other words, if you go to a mall, you can buy things cheap and enjoy the air conditioning. The reasons is a lot of the employees in malls do not get benefits. That's why things are cheap. And of course, those who invest in stocks of malls, disclosure, I am an investor of SMIC. I get the dividends. Which is why, as an investor, I use it as a channel to dialogue with our friends at the SM Group. It's a long-term process because it's something that they have to keep thinking of. As a matter of fact, when the president sitting in Malacanang now said appealed for the end of ENDO, the SM Group immediately regularized 5,000 employees. Another big company recently announced that they had just regularized 17,000 employees. So I think they're motivated now to do something about it. Next. Now, but this is what happens. There are many ways that stakeholders can be ignored. So for example, customers might get unsafe or unhealthy products. Let's just show all of it, please. Government might be cheated of taxes. Employees might not get job security. The public is exposed to indecent or false advertising. Suppliers get delayed payments. Rivers get waste dumped on them. Investors have their equity wasted by the controlling shareholders. And creditors have their credit misused. Now let's look at specifics. Let's look at labor, the famous or infamous ENDO. Now this is something I think more CSR research should be done on. If you look at the statistics, this is from the Labor Force Survey, temporary employment in 2000 was just 18.4% of the workers. It grew to 20.8% in 2005, 21.9% in 2010, 24.0% in 2014. I don't have the data for 15, 16, 17, but do you think it's higher or lower than 24? Well, let's wait for the data, but I also suspect it's higher. So the question is, how can companies be competitive while complying with labor law? Well, there are some companies who are able to do it. For example, next, this guy, his name is Bernie Liu of Golden ABC. These are some of the companies in Golden ABC. I'm sure you see this in the malls, right? Of course, you have Pen Shop, For Me, Memo, Regatta, Oxygen. And I always go to the malls and I talk to the sales ladies of all the shops. And I always have one question: are you regular? And so you can do this also as part of your CSR research. If I go to a Golden ABC store, they always say they're regular. Then you cross to another shop across, and they cannot even look at your eyes when you ask them if they're regular, because they are not. So it can be done. Some do it. They don't call attention to themselves, but it can be done. But the question is, how can they do it? I think that deserves research. That would be terrific CSR research. Next. What about safety of products? You all remember what happened to the Samsung Note 7? It has a funny way of exploding into flames, right? But we shouldn't be surprised because the consumption pattern of people is such that we want an updated cell phone faster and faster. When I was younger, a new Nokia model would come out every 2 years, then every 1 year. Now a new Samsung model can come out every 3 months. And because of that, testing for safety is not as thorough. Of course, to Samsung's credit, once they got the report that there was a safety issue, they recalled the product completely, right? But not before a lot of it was already exploding into flames. Let's look at other issues. Alcohol and the youth. What is the impact of increasing sales of alcohol to school-age youth? Here we see a lot of the alcoholic beverage companies. Of course, we have Tanduay, Ginebra, San Miguel, and these are all young people. Notice the females. You know, female students now can drink Red Horse like it's water. You know, I'm an anthropologist by training, so I really immerse myself in the youth culture. I'm sure you read in the news that our top alcoholic companies in the Philippines have made so much money, they have bought international companies. Fundador was a former Spanish company, is now owned by the Filipinos. So is McKay, which was a foreign company. You'll have to think, where does all the cash come from? Well, don't think anymore. We have one of the youngest populations in the world. Our median age is 23 years old. That means any company that can sell to young people will make a lot of money. Now, that's a CSR research I'd like to see done. What is the impact of all of these increasing sales of alcohol to school-age youth? Well, alcohol and substance abuse are very much related, so you will remember, next please, that just last year, during one of the open-air concerts held in a major venue here, we had young people die during the concert because they would be ingesting combinations of ecstasy, alcoholic beverages, and so on, and it would take so much toll on their bodies that their hearts would just blow up. So this kind of substance abuse tends to be a natural progression for those who are exposed to a lot of these social events fueled by alcohol. So the key question, therefore, for alcohol beverage companies is that what can they do so that drinking is limited only to those of age and in a moderated way? Right now, based on my observation, there is no checking of age, and certainly there's no moderation going on. Because in fact, when you order, it's always one bucket, no? 6. I remember before when I was younger, because I also like to enjoy beer, of course, when I would order, they would give you one. Now they would give you one bucket, irrespective of your age. So, of course, I've discussed this with my friends in the alcohol industry. Well, they smile at me. But I tell them, look, we are all responsible for our young. They're the future of our generation. So it's something to think about. So I think they're thinking about it. Next. Casinos. As you know, our government has made a major push for us to compete with Macau and even Las Vegas. I remember when this was being proposed before, they said by 2016, we will match the revenue of Las Vegas. All of these appear in the development plans of our government. As you know, the targets have not been met. Not only that, we are already seeing some of the backlash. You remember this? Resorts World in flames. And you remember this man, a government employee who is a recognized gambling addict. So in a fit of being upset, he went into Resorts World and set the casino in flames. Unfortunately, several Filipinos died. Now, I wrote a column more than 3 years ago about the gambling that was growing in the entertainment city, and I did mention 2 things, that it will lead to a lot of mental health issues, and it will lead to money laundering, both of which have already happened. But many of the major conglomerates are invested in the casinos here. So the question is, what can be done? In Singapore, they're extremely strict on gambling for locals. So they control it very effectively. Maybe we can do that. Maybe somebody can do research on that and give a proposal to the government. Our gambling laws are still martial law era. No? Next. Let's look at advertising. You know this advertising? Which company is this? Kenny Rogers, very healthy, right? Have you seen their latest advertising? Well, it's this one. Next. Now, this is a well-known actress. This is Solen. So this is their latest advertising. Now, let me pose a question to you. What could be the impact of, well, I like this one. It has health implications. But this is a family restaurant. And if you go to Kenny Rogers now, this video is playing the whole day. The whole day in a family restaurant. Something to think about. Because remember, family restaurants shape cultural values. Now, going to Jollibee is a family event. Now, those going to Kenny Rogers will have a family event too, with this image playing continuously. Now, I eat there too, so I gave the feedback to the management for all the good that will do. But you know, we should all try. Next. So I wanted to propose that integral human development be a focus of our CSR. Next. So when we look at companies, let's ask ourselves, next, whether the business focuses on developing the body, the health of the body, which is why I pointed out dangers with alcohol abuse, substance abuse. So all businesses must focus on helping everybody take care of their body. The next is, of course, cognitive development. Schools are very good at this. So people have to know why they're doing certain things. Next. Next. Emotional development. This is when people get the courage, the confidence to do what needs to be done. Aesthetic development, this is our artistic taste being developed. Next. Social development, this is when we can get connected to those who are needy, who have less in society, and how we can support them. And of course, the relationships within the organization itself. Well, moral development doesn't need much explanation. It's when we know the difference between right and wrong. Next. Of course, spiritual development is having a higher purpose in life. For those of us who believe in a God, then we know we are accountable to Him for the gifts He has given us. But even if we are purely secular, we must believe that our life has to have significance, especially for making the lives of others better. So integral human development would be a nice framework to use for CSR research. And there is a lot of literature on this available in the journals. Next. So what would happen if CSR research was truly to become relevant in our country? I showed you earlier the shape of our country now. But I think if we have more businesses, next. If we have businesses that would be uplifting, back please. Okay. The key is to build as many businesses that will apply principles of human development, so that we can use them as pumps to uplift as many of our people as possible, not just from economic want, but even all of the problems that beset human beings: lack of purpose, poor health, lack of relationships and friendships, so that we achieve the shape we want for our country. Next, which is this. So if we do this consistently, next, we can change the color of our map from this, next, to this. And I think it's possible within our lifetime. Thank you very much. So I would open the floor for some comments or questions for those who have any, or maybe whether they're planning some research which they think might be beneficial in light of what was shared. Would Mr. Moderator want to intervene? Or do I just moderate it? How would you?
Yeah. For those who have questions or any insights to share, you can proceed to the microphones set up along the two aisles. Just introduce yourself, the organization you represent, and maybe even your designation, so we can proceed with the open forum. Thank you. Anybody po?
Mukhang maaga ako makakauwi. Yes, the lady over here. Oh, hello. Yes. How are you? Hello, Mrs. Rivera. Pleased to meet you.
About what do you think of the contractual labor going on at Clark Ecozone today?
Well, I'm not very informed on the level of, well, you know, special economic zones are given privileges by the government to encourage foreign locators to do business there, right? In general, I think the intent of the Constitution is to assure security of tenure for workers. So I think if that continues on a sustained basis, it can help explain why our country cannot develop. Of course, there are no simple answers to the matter of how best to deploy labor, but the general principle is that if people do work that is essential for the company, then they should have security. Because people have to plan their lives, they have to plan their families, they have to assure themselves of continuous health. What's the point of saving funds from your salary if one medical emergency will wipe you out? Which is the fate of many Filipinos. And why would young millennials plan for their families when they move from job to job? Well, they can plan to have one girlfriend in each job, which is what some of them do. But, you know, this kind of movement in the long run is not healthy for society, because societies are stabilized by stable relationships. The first stable relationship, of course, is with the family. Hopefully, the next is with God. The third should be with your job, because if you don't have that, you don't have a foundation upon which to build a family, your own family. So we have seen the cost of destroyed families in this country. 10 to 12 million Filipinos are working abroad for lack of opportunities in this country. And we see the cost of that in unsupervised young people who have, their studies are suffering and sometimes they fall into vice. So I think it's very important that companies in general and even those in the economic zones think seriously about providing security of tenure. But I realize that from a competitive point of view, it's not easy to do. But it is not impossible. We have seen companies who have become competitive by leveraging on their people and not just by keeping their people cheap.
Is the government doing anything about it?
Well, as I said, the economic zone has special privileges. So I think in the same way that our government approved the entertainment city, which is $9 billion of investment in casinos, I raised this matter with the secretary, and I think if you in the MAP, we have meetings with the cabinet secretaries almost every month, each cabinet secretary. I always raise the interesting questions in those breakfast meetings. I'm always surprised that when I raise them, the room becomes very quiet and nobody says anything. Because we are Filipinos, right? And then when we adjourn and I go out, they approach me and say, that question you asked, that was very important. And I say, yes, it was very important. I wish you had asked it too. Because we are so polite to each other when our country is suffering. So I think what I ask my students to do is to write their congressman, because there is a website, congress.gov.ph. If you feel anything about anything that's happening in your country, write your congressman, write your mayor. This is a democracy. The Constitution says sovereignty resides in the people and all power emanates from the people. This is not a monarchy. Each of us have rights, but we have to express them. But Filipinos are famously, notoriously tolerant as a people, to a fault. Therefore, those in power sometimes forget that we have certain needs. So I think, especially the educated class, we need to speak up for those who don't have a voice. But I'm very hopeful. I think I smell change in the air. But we are counting on the young people. They are our hope. I'm planning on my retirement already. I'll just watch Game of Thrones reruns, But I still dream for the young. You are the ones keeping us hopeful. Okay? So I think the government needs a nudge every now and then from us. The gentleman there, I think, has an insight to share.
Good morning. My name is Mehul. I'm from University of Bohol. Thank you, Professor Ben, for very insightful sharing, bringing into the topic and understanding how research can help us. I have two small questions, if you can help us. One is about, you were mentioning that our Constitution mentions common good many times.
7 times.
7 times, right? And also, when we look at the Philippines, the field of education itself is no more common good. It has become more commercialized and privatized. How research can help us towards bringing this idea of common good even within education? That would be my first question, to know your insight on that. Second would be, when we were looking at the data on poverty and economic growth, how do you think that the local model of enterprising, like indigenous model from Philippines, could help us in this, and what kind of research we can conduct in those areas?
Well, yeah,
Thank you.
Those are two excellent questions. Certainly, one of the requirements of integral human development is education. So the cost of education has to be kept within reasonable bounds. Well, the Constitution assures that basic education is to be free for all, right? In fact, even as we speak here, this year, state schools have already declared free tuition in most levels. Even UP students were stunned because they were suddenly told their tuition would be made free. So, but we know the situation in the Philippines. The state schools are not enough to provide for all of the needs of our growing population. So the government really has to come up with very, very creative ways to address the educational needs of people. For me, what's important is that with the implementation of K to 12, we have to make sure that our young people learn very useful skills early on. They will need to be productive. Remember, Bill Gates was 17 years old when he set up Microsoft. Mark Zuckerberg was 19 years old when he set up Facebook. Where are our 17 and 19-year-olds if they're not malling or playing in the internet cafe or getting drunk somewhere? We have to encourage young people to be productive. After all, they have smartphones. A smartphone is a supercomputer in the hands of a person. When we sent a man to the moon in 1969, the computer on the space shuttle had only 64 KB of memory. So you can put a man on the moon with 64 KB of memory. Young people now have a smartphone. How much memory does your smartphone have, young lady? Would you know? Siguro 8 gigabytes yan, ano? Maybe even more. 32 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes means you can have 10 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica inside that phone. The Encyclopedia Britannica I had to pay for over 5 years for my son. You can have 10 of that inside your phone. But the young people do not understand this. They need teachers who will enable them to use knowledge in a productive way. So that's where the teachers come in. We have to encourage them to use this in productive ways. So on the second question about indigenous business, that is a profoundly important question. Because of our unique archipelagic and regional flavor in our country, there are many things that Filipinos can come up with which has tremendous entrepreneurial value. Already we've seen a lot of businesses grow because of the use of indigenous practices, right? When Mang Inasal became popular, I remember the first time I tasted Inasal in Bacolod, I fell in love with it, right? But it was 15 years later before Manileños could eat it. And now when they set up Mang Inasal, of course, Jollibee bought it. That's why I think the taste is changing a bit. But anyway, maybe I'm just imagining it. The founder sold off to Jollibee, became a billionaire, set up Double Dragon, and he's now into other things. But in every region, you have special gifts. And you need entrepreneurs to develop those. Because other Filipinos would love to have access to those things. But entrepreneurs need capital. This is the challenge. The government has to make capital available for entrepreneurs. In our banks, unfortunately, those who have the most money are the ones who can borrow the most, which is the opposite. Even when the central bank releases retail treasury bills, retail, right? Ideally, 5,000 to buy those treasury bills. If you go to a bank, they say the minimum purchase is 200,000, which is a violation of that principle. If you want to buy bonds from the government, you should be able to buy it at the lowest rate. So many of our systems really favor those who have money. That's something we need to remind our government about. Anyway, if we're to believe what the president is saying, he will make a lot of this accessible to the poor. But we have to remind them to keep doing that. So it will take a while, but I'm still hopeful it can happen within our lifetime. So those are just my personal insights, but I think research can find out more. So if you do research on this, please share them with me. Thank you.
Yeah,
yes,
there's one
I
question.
think a gentleman there would like to raise a question.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Marvin
sir.
Samson from the University of Luzon.
Hello,
Sir,
Marvin.
thank you for your short but meaningful talk.
My pleasure, yes.
Yeah, I like it very much. I was listening intently. You were talking about prosperity and development in the countryside. And I like the idea of the government and the people, we working together as a group and as a nation to curb or to control alcoholism and gambling in our country. But if we look at the situation today, gambling and alcoholism are, as you said, and as we observed, these are top earners or top businesses in our country. The way I look at it, the government looks for generation of income by way of taxes. So the more we encourage, now I'm not saying that the government is giving priority to gambling, but the more we encourage gambling and the more we encourage tax collection, and we all know that gambling and alcoholism or drinks are attractive to the youth. That means the government is promoting these vices. Okay. And we know that in one case, it's very popular, like this one cigarette company is now arranging, is now arranging with the government for a 25 billion tax evasion case. So how do you comment on this, sir? This parallelism and these mispriorities.
Well, as I said, government is just a reflection of the people. We vote these people in and we don't hold them accountable. What do we expect? Which is why I personally have advocated that every time I'm in a government agency or I'm in front of a cabinet secretary, I let them know what I think. But the thing is, during the next election cycle, we just vote them and then leave them alone. In the US, grade 5 students petition their congressman. You know, save the whale. A congressman will come to his office at 8 o'clock. There are 200 grade 5 students there with petitions. And then the camera is there pointing at the congressman, and the children are saying, save the whale, save the whale. So as early as 10 years old, you know that you can make your congressman do things for you. Unfortunately, the Philippines is a semi-feudal country. We are a modern democracy only on paper. Our mentality is that anyone in power should be deferred to. This is one of the things that we need to outgrow. We are a Republican democracy. If you're in the same room as a Zobel de Ayala or a Tan or a C, the same blood runs through your veins. You're both Filipinos. They just happen to have a bigger bank account. But see, as humans, we are all the same. So we need to express our needs assertively to our government. However, my talk is really not on government, but on business, right? So we need to have more entrepreneurs who will have a sense of love for country. So if you, for example, interview Bernie Liu, which I did, the headquarters of Golden ABC is in Balintawak. And so I asked him, why would a company like Golden ABC set up a headquarters in Balintawak? Why not in Ayala, in Rockwell, in Eastwood, or Global City? And his answer was simple, because this is where we started. We want this community to grow with us. This kind of mentality. If you look at Zara, are you familiar with Zara, the clothing firm? The founder, Ortega, is one of the richest men in Spain. He was born in one of the poorest parts of Spain. That part of Spain now is prosperous. He helped that region become prosperous. Can't we have more entrepreneurs like that? We do not fault businessmen for accumulating wealth. All we ask is that they take the others with them. Because that is what the common good is. It's like a buffet. Do you like going to buffets? I love buffets, right? But imagine if you're in a buffet and every time you go to the buffet table, those closest to the buffet table have already taken all the nice food. How would you feel? Right? The Philippines is meant to be a buffet. We all should have access to development, to education, to health, to voice in political affairs, to relationships, di ba? Meron namang forever talaga eh. Ha? But you have to work on it. Ha? Hindi pwede yung ligawan lang by text, tas break up by text. Hindi pwede yung ganon. We have to build solid families, build a solid country that we can all be proud of. Actually, other countries are impressed with us. Our character, our love for family. We ourselves sometimes take it for granted. This is our treasure. Our temperament, our love for family. Everywhere we are appreciated, but we squander this. And sometimes we need to remind for example, during a breakfast meeting with the Secretary of Tourism, whom I admire, no? Because he started the It's More Fun in the Philippines campaign. I asked him, Mr. Secretary, I'm concerned because we overcommit gambling to tourists. We are a family-centered country, and yet our selling point is by the time a tourist lands in Naiya, within 15 minutes, he's sitting in front of a gambling table. And they even built an elevated road so that gamblers can go more quickly, right? Whereas it takes me 2 hours from my home to go to the office. So how do I feel? And then he said, well, our values are not all the same. That's true. However, our Constitution says what we stand for. Shouldn't we project that to other countries? And who says we can compete with Macau and Las Vegas? That's an illusion. If we spend 10 billion US dollars in the Philippines, Macau will spend 30 billion. We're trying hard. That's not our core competence. Because they will not come just for the gambling. They come for everything else, the money laundering. They come for the prostitution. This is all facts of life. We have to, the reason I feel so strongly about this is because De La Salle University is the closest university to the entertainment city. And I don't remember ever having a public forum where we were asked what we thought. I think we should have been asked, but since we were not asked, I'm making sure we are heard. So maybe you can help us. We can campaign, we can go there together later. We can interview them. We can still convert that into a family-friendly place if we put our heads together. Because I'm talking to the SM group, and I think, remember, the SM group was the first one to ban R-rated movies. Remember that? They can do it. Do you know how much money 50 Shades of Grey made in the Philippines? 500 million. Not a single peso went to an SM theater. Because they did not show that movie. Which means they can say no. They can. Businesses can say no to certain practices. It's not all about money. But we have to tell them that we appreciate it. Because otherwise, money is money. So good luck to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. So at this point, we would like to show our appreciation to Dr. Teehankee. We shall present the plaque of appreciation. May I request Mr. Antonio Yap to help us out. So allow me to read the content of this plaque. Benita and Catalino Yap Foundation awards this plaque of appreciation to Dr. Benito L. Teehankee for his valuable support to the 7th Philippine Conference on Research in CSR, given this 21st day of August 2017 at Club Filipino Green Hills, San Juan, Metro Manila. Signed, Antonio S. Yap, Founder and Chairman. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Teehankee.